If you're really serious about wine, you know the whole story starts right there, in the vineyard. But to truly get it, to understand what's in your glass, we have to go deeper. We need to understand the grapevine itself. So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to break down the grapevine piece by piece to see how each part plays a role in the wine you love. You know, when you look at a vineyard in the middle of winter, this is pretty much what you see. It just looks like a bunch of sleeping, dormant wood, right? Almost looks lifeless. But locked inside that wood is all the potential for the next great vintage. So the big question is, how does this tangle of sticks transform into this vibrant, green, living thing that gives us such amazing wine? Well, that's the journey we're about to take. We're going to build this vine from the ground up in 5 parts. First, we'll start with the foundation, the stuff you can't even see. Then, we'll move up to the permanent, woody parts. After that, we'll get into the real secret to every harvest, last year's wood. Then we'll check out all the new green growth for this season. And finally, we'll see how a flower becomes the fruit that ends up in our glass. Sound good? Let's dive in. All right, part 1, the unseen foundation. Before we can even begin to talk about grapes, we have to talk about what's going on underground. This hidden world, well, it's basically the engine that drives everything we see above ground. So what's so special about the root system? Well, it's kind of doing 3 crucial jobs all at once. First, it's the anchor, right? Holding the vine steady. Second, it's the lifeline, sucking up all the water and nutrients from the soil. And third, it's like a battery pack, storing up energy all season long so the vine can survive the winter and have enough juice to burst back to life in the spring. Pretty important stuff. Now here's a really cool piece of wine history that's still alive in pretty much every vineyard today. You see, most modern grapevines are actually 2 different plants fused into one. Back in the 1800s, a tiny pest called phylloxera just wiped out Europe's vineyards. It was a total catastrophe. But growers came up with this brilliant solution. They started grafting their classic grapevines, the part that grows the actual Chardonnay or Merlot, called the scion, onto the rootstock of American vines that were naturally resistant to the pest. That bottom part is called the rootstock. The result? A single, resilient supervine. And if you're ever walking through a vineyard, you can actually see the evidence of this right on the trunk. See that little bulge there? That's the graft union. It's the exact spot where the rootstock and the scion were joined together. It's basically a scar that tells this incredible story of survival that saved the entire world of wine as we know it. Okay, so moving up from the roots, we get to the parts of the vine that stick around for the long haul. This is the permanent framework. Think of it as the woody backbone that's going to support that vine for its entire life. The 2 main players here are the trunk and the cordon. The trunk is easy. It's the backbone, the main vertical part that acts like a superhighway for water and nutrients coming up from the roots. And the cordons? Those are the permanent arms that stretch out sideways, usually trained right along a trellis wire. This whole thing is the basic skeleton the grape grower has to work with year after year. And here you can see exactly what that permanent skeleton looks like in practice. You've got that sturdy trunk coming up from the ground, and then it splits into those 2 horizontal arms, the cordons, running right along the wire. This structure is the foundation, and everything the grower does in the winter is about setting this stage for the new season's growth. Okay, part 3, last year's wood. Now this is where things get really important, especially if you're studying for something like the WSET. What happened last year is everything for this year's harvest. So, listen up. If you remember just one thing from this entire explainer, make it this rule. Grapes do not grow from the old permanent trunk or the cordons. They only grow on the new green shoots that sprout from buds on last year's wood. That's it. That's the whole ballgame. And it's the entire reason pruning is the most critical job in the vineyard. It's all about deciding which pieces of 1-year-old wood to keep. So what do we call this magical 1-year-old wood? It's called a cane. See, last summer, this was just a green, flexible shoot. But over the winter, it hardens up, turns brown and woody, a process called lignification. This mature cane is now the launch pad for this year's crop because it's covered in all those precious buds. So growers have 2 basic strategies for dealing with this 1-year-old wood. In what's called cane pruning, they leave a couple of long canes, each with maybe 8 to 20 buds. But in spur pruning, they do the opposite. They cut the canes way back into these little short stubs called spurs with only 2 or 3 buds each. Both are 1-year-old wood, just managed in totally different ways. And here's a perfect side-by-side. The Spur pruned vine on the left keeps those permanent cordons and just has these little nubs of one-year-old wood. But the cane pruned vine on the right, it has those long, flexible canes from last year that get tied down. They're just two different ways of thinking about how to set up the vine for the best possible harvest. All right, part 4, this year's green growth. So now we're in the current season. The vine wakes up, those buds we talked about burst open, and bam, you get this explosion of green. This is the engine room where all the energy for the whole vintage gets made. This is a shoot. It's the main green thing that grows out of a bud on that one-year-old wood. And absolutely everything that matters during the growing season, making sugar, flowering, and of course growing grapes, it all happens right here, on these shoots. Now, every shoot comes with its own little toolkit. The most important tools by far are the leaves. They're the solar panels. They soak up sunlight and use photosynthesis to create all the sugar that's going to make those grapes ripe and delicious. And then you've got these little things, tendrils. They're like wiry little fingers that reach out and grab onto the trellis wires to support the shoot. And here is where the cycle just gets beautiful. As this year's shoot is growing, it's already getting ready for next year. See, right in that little nook where a leaf stem meets the shoot, a new bud starts to form. And inside that tiny little package is a fully formed miniature shoot for the following season. It's got tiny leaves and even a pre-formed bunch of grapes. The vine is always thinking 1 year ahead. It's incredible. And finally, part 5, from flower to fruit. This is the whole point, right? This is what all that structure and all that energy has been building towards, the grand finale. So how do we actually get a grape? Well, it's a 4-step journey. First, this thing called an inflorescence, which is just a fancy word for a flower cluster, shows up on the green shoot. Second, the flowers pollinate themselves. Third, if that pollination is successful, we get what's called fruit set, where each flower turns into a tiny, hard green berry. And finally, the best part, ripening. This is when the berries swell up, get filled with sugar from the leaves, and develop all the color and flavor that will eventually make a beautiful wine. So we've gone all the way from the hidden roots to a perfectly ripe grape. And as you can see, every single part has a job to do, which leads me to one last question for you. Now that you know the whole anatomy, which part do you think is the most critical for how a wine actually tastes? Is it the rootstock controlling how much water the vine gets? Is it the leaves creating all the sugar? Or is it for growers' decisions about how to prune that all-important one-year-old wood? It's something to think about next time you pour a glass.